My name is Mark, and the day my mom told me I was no longer part of her life still echoes in my chest like it happened 5 minutes ago. She stood there with her new husband, Gerald, holding his arm like he was the one who raised her, protected her, and kept her afloat all those years. I remember waiting for her to look at me the way she used to, with softness or hesitation or even guilt. But there was nothing, just a cold finality that felt heavier than any words she could have chosen. I left her house with a single backpack, not because I wanted to start fresh, but because it was all she allowed me to take. I kept thinking this had to be temporary, that she would call me, that she would remember who had been there for her before Gerald swooped in. But days passed, weeks passed, and silence settled in like a new roommate. The thing is, when someone cuts you out, they assume you will disappear. They assume they have decided the ending of your story. But being abandoned like that does something to you. It hardens you in some places and sharpens you in others. I did not know then that Gerald had a reason for wanting me gone. I did not know what he was planning behind closed doors, what documents he was preparing, or how deeply he was rewriting my father's legacy. All I knew was that my mother chose him, and I was on my own. If you are here because you know what betrayal feels like, stay with me. My story is proof that being thrown out can be the very thing that pushes you into the life you were meant to build. And if you want more stories where justice has a long memory, make sure you join me for the full journey. Because this is just the beginning. I spent the first few weeks drifting between cheap rooms and long shifts, telling myself I was fine, telling myself I didn't need anyone. But loneliness has a way of leaking through the cracks, even when you try to seal them with work and exhaustion. I took a job at a small logistics company just to survive. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even stable. But it was something to hold on to. The warehouse smelled like cardboard dust and diesel fuel, and the office looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 90s. Still, there was a quiet rhythm to the place that made me feel like I belonged somewhere again. I pushed into every role they would let me touch. Filing, data entry, scheduling, even cleaning up the break room if it kept me busy. I had nothing left from the life I once knew, so I threw everything into the one thing I had now. There was a man there named Frank, older, calm, the kind of guy who read people without ever prying. He saw how hard I worked. One night after everyone else left, he asked me to stay behind. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he pulled up a chair and said, "You learn things fast. Fast enough to do more than pushing papers." He started teaching me about operations and supply chains, about how companies really move money and materials, about how everything connects. I didn't know it then, but those late nights with Frank were reshaping my entire future. Piece by piece, he handed me the tools to rebuild myself, tools no one ever thought I would need. But while I was learning, Gerald was moving. I didn't know it yet, but he was already digging into my father's past, pulling at old agreements, manipulating my mother into signing papers she did not understand. Papers that were designed to erase me. I thought she was simply choosing him over me. The truth was worse. Gerald was clearing the path for something much bigger. The first hint came out of nowhere. I was sorting shipment invoices when I saw his name printed on a document from a major firm. Gerald Morris. The same signature I had seen 1,000 times on holiday cards. The same handwriting that signed the letter telling me not to come home again. The invoice didn't explain much, but it didn't have to. My stomach twisted the moment I saw it. Why was Gerald involved with the company I was now working with? Why did his name appear on a project connected to a logistics expansion? And why did this particular firm sound familiar in a way I couldn't place? I tried to shake it off, but the thought stuck with me. It followed me on the bus ride home and whispered in the back of my mind as I stared at the city lights through my window. I didn't know it yet, but this was the first thread I would pull, the first crack in the wall Gerald built to keep me out. For days I tried to convince myself that Gerald's name showing up on that document was just a coincidence. Maybe it was a different Gerald Morris. Maybe I was overthinking it because I still carried the bruise of everything he took from me. But the mind has a strange way of nudging you toward truths you're not ready to face. And mine wasn't letting this go. I started paying more attention at work, listening closer when the managers discussed partnerships, reading the small print on every contract that crossed my desk. And little by little, The pieces began to align in a way that made my chest tighten. One afternoon, a senior coordinator accidentally left an open binder on the counter. I didn't mean to snoop, but the name of the firm stamped on the cover pulled my eyes in like gravity. It was the same company tied to my father's old business, my father's legacy, the company I grew up hearing about in whispered stories after he passed. The one my mother said was long gone, taken over, absorbed, forgotten. But the way she avoided questions every time I asked about it, it hit me now in a way it didn't when I was younger. She wasn't hiding the past. Someone else was shaping her answers. I stepped outside to breathe, gripping the binder like it might burn me. My hands trembled, because suddenly the timeline made sense. My father's business disappearing, my mother meeting Gerald, her growing silence around anything tied to my dad, her sudden marriage, her sudden distance, her sudden dismissal of me. Gerald wasn't just in her life, he was rewriting mine. That night I searched online for anything tied to the old company's name. Most of the records had been buried under mergers. But one small article, barely visible, mentioned an acquisition attempt happening behind closed doors. An attempt led by none other than Gerald Morris. And then I found it, the piece that made my heart stop. A forum post written years ago discussing the founding of the company. There were names listed, partners, investors, and right there, faded and almost forgotten, was my father's signature. My dad wasn't an employee, he wasn't a consultant, he was a co-founder. I sat there staring at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. I was shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. All my life I thought my father left behind memories, nothing more. But he left behind something else, a share, a literal stake in a company Gerald was trying to take for himself. A share that, legally, couldn't disappear just because someone wanted it to. And Gerald knew it. That explained everything. Why he wanted me gone. Why he wanted me cut out emotionally, financially, legally. Why my mom suddenly saw me as a burden instead of her son. He had convinced her that distancing herself from me would somehow protect her new life with him, and she trusted him more than she trusted me. The anger that hit me then wasn't the fire-burning kind. It was cold, slow, and razor-sharp. The kind that clears the fog from your mind and makes you see everything with painful clarity. I didn't tell anyone what I found. Not Frank, not co-workers, no one. This wasn't a secret I was ready to share. It was a seed I needed to protect until I understood what it meant. But I started digging deeper, quietly, carefully, pulling records, tracing old agreements, reading every scrap of business law I could find, and the deeper I dug, the more obvious it became. My father's shares never legally transferred. The company Gerald was trying to take over was still partly mine. He didn't cut me out to hurt me. He cut me out because he feared me. And in that moment, for the first time since I lost my mother, I felt something powerful rise inside me. Not revenge, not rage, something steadier. I did not sleep the night I realized what Gerald had been doing. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my childhood, every conversation with my mother, every strange silence she gave me when I asked about my father's old business. I kept wondering how long Gerald had been planning this. How early he began shaping her into someone who would choose him over me. Somewhere between the memories and the questions, something inside me hardened into resolve. If my father left me a piece of his life's work, then I wouldn't let someone like Gerald erase it. But knowing the truth and proving it were two very different battles. The first thing I did was find every scrap of information left behind about my dad's involvement. It wasn't much. Most records were buried, sealed, or swallowed by the mergers that happened years ago. But the internet never forgets everything. I found old press photos, archived legal documents, and even a forgotten blog post from an ex-employee who admired my father's vision. Piece by piece, I built the story back up. Then I did something I knew I had to, but dreaded deeply. I tracked down one of my dad's former colleagues. His name was Michael Granger. He was retired now, living in a quiet suburb. I emailed him first, explaining only that I needed to talk about my dad's company. When he agreed to meet, I felt my stomach twist like I was walking into something enormous. Michael opened the door and froze when he saw me. Not because he recognized me, but because for a moment he thought he was seeing my father. That's what he told me later. The way his eyes softened told me he wasn't lying. We talked in his kitchen for hours. He told me how my father poured everything he had into the company, how he treated employees like family, how he was the kind of man who solved problems by listening, not ordering. I felt a lump in my throat hearing someone speak of him that way. My mother stopped talking about him years before she met Gerald, so I grew up with blurry secondhand stories. But Michael remembered my father vividly. When I asked about the shares, Michael went quiet. He stood up without saying anything and disappeared into a back room. When he returned, he carried a worn folder. Edges frayed, paper faded, but still intact. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward me. "I kept this because I knew someday someone might try to bury him," he said softly. "Your father deserved better." Inside the folder were original agreements, contracts, signed documents, proof that my father and his co-founders were equal partners and that each partner's shares passed to their legal heir unless explicitly reassigned. My father never reassigned anything. He died suddenly. His shares should have passed to my mother, and by extension to me. But my mother never mentioned any of it. Gerald made sure of that. The weight of the folder felt heavier than anything I had ever held. When I left Michael's house, my hands shook. Not from fear, but from the realization that this was real. This wasn't a rumor or theory. My father left something behind. Something powerful. Something Gerald wanted for himself so badly he cut me out of my own family to do it. The next few days were a blur of research, legal consultations, and quiet panic. I met with a lawyer recommended by Frank, though I didn't tell Frank why. The lawyer read through the documents with a depth of focus that made my breath catch. When he finally leaned back, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret at first. "These papers are authentic," he said. "And if the company Gerald is trying to acquire is the same entity, under mergers or not, then you hold legal rights he didn't want you to know about." He paused. "And you can challenge him. In fact, you may hold enough power to stop his acquisition altogether." For a moment I couldn't move. I sat there absorbing the magnitude of it. Me, the son who got kicked out with a single backpack, had the legal right to stand in Gerald's path. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't irrelevant. I was the one person he should have feared. But it wasn't just about stopping him. The lawyer explained something else, something bigger. If the board still recognized the founding rights, if they valued lineage and legacy, and if Gerald was pursuing the CEO seat as aggressively as rumored, then I had the right not just to challenge him, but to claim what my father once built. I had the right to run for CEO. The idea hit me so hard I almost laughed. Me? The kid who worked warehouse shifts and ate instant noodles every night? The kid who barely had a place to sleep 2 months ago? The kid my mother abandoned for a man in a tailored suit? But I wasn't just that kid anymore. Frank's lessons, the hours at the logistics firm, the documents from Michael, everything had been shaping me for something I didn't even know was coming. And then came the moment that pushed everything into motion. I received an email, anonymous, containing a forwarded memo about an upcoming board meeting. A meeting to finalize the CEO appointment. A meeting scheduled for 12 days from now. Gerald was about to take the seat that should have never been his. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the window he never expected me to find. And if I wanted to honor my father, if I wanted to take back what was being stolen, if I wanted justice, not revenge, but justice, I had to move now. I spent the next days preparing, studying, building my case, gathering witnesses, organizing every scrap of proof. I had never worked harder in my life. And with every step I felt my father beside me in a way I never had before. By the time the 12 days passed, I wasn't the abandoned son anymore. I wasn't the outsider. I was a co-founder's heir walking into a battlefield where I finally had a weapon. Stay with me, because what happened at that meeting, that's when everything exploded. I walked into the board's headquarters 12 days later with the same backpack I had the day my mother told me to leave. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe it was stubborn. But carrying it reminded me of where this all started, of who I had been, and who I refused to remain. I arrived early, long before anyone else. The lobby was quiet. the kind of quiet that presses against your ribs. I sat there with the folder of documents in my lap, the proof of everything Gerald tried to erase. Every few minutes I caught myself gripping it tighter, like I was afraid the whole thing might vanish if I let go. People began arriving one by one, executives, assistants, board members. I watched their eyes skim over me without recognition. I was invisible to them, just a young guy sitting alone in a corner. They had no idea I wasn't here to watch. I was here to challenge the man they were about to hand the company to. Finally, the board secretary stepped out and called the meeting to order. The members filed in, their suits crisp and their expressions practiced. I followed behind them, nerves tightening around my throat. The boardroom was massive, built for intimidation. A long, polished table, portraits of the founders lining the walls. One of those portraits should have been my father, but it wasn't. Gerald made sure his memory stayed small, hidden, replaceable. And then he walked in. Gerald entered the room, smiling wide, projecting confidence with every step. A man who believed the world already belonged to him. My mother followed behind him, hesitant, almost shrinking inside herself. She didn't look at me, though she must have felt my presence. Gerald did see me. I watched confusion flicker in his eyes for a fraction of a second before he smoothed it over. He approached with an almost mocking politeness. "Ethan, this is unexpected." I held his stare. "I'm here for the meeting." He gave a patronizing half-chuckle. "This is a closed board session. You're not invited." I placed my hand on the folder. "Actually, I am." For a moment, the room went still. Several board members exchanged confused glances. Gerald's smile thinned. Before he could respond, the lead board member, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine, whose reputation for fairness was almost mythic, asked, "And you are?" "I'm Ethan Ward," I said, "the son of Daniel Ward." The name hit the room like a dropped glass. Heads lifted, eyes widened. Catherine leaned forward, her expression shifting. She studied me with a level of attention I wasn't prepared for. "Daniel Ward founded this company." "He co-founded it," I corrected, "and he left behind documented shares that were never legally transferred." That sentence changed everything. Gerald stepped forward quickly, too quickly, his calm cracking. "This is absurd. His mother inherited nothing. There were no remaining assets. This boy is confused." I cut him off, placing the folder on the table and sliding it toward Catherine. "These are the original contracts, signed by my father and the other founders, witnessed, sealed. They state clearly that his shares pass to his legal heir, which is me." The room erupted into murmurs. Catherine opened the folder and took her time reading. I watched her eyes scan the pages, her jaw tightening as the truth settled in. She passed the documents down the line, each board member absorbing the proof piece by piece. Every second chipped away at Gerald's confidence until he stood rigid, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. My mother stayed frozen behind him, her face pale, her eyes shining with something between fear and regret. Finally, Catherine looked up. "These documents are valid, and they place Ethan Ward as a rightful shareholder with significant voting power." My heart hammered so hard it felt like it might shake the table. Gerald tried to recover. "Even if that's true, he has no business experience, no qualifications, nothing that justifies involvement at this level." Catherine asked me the question that mattered most. "Ethan, why are you here today?" I swallowed hard. "Because I know Gerald is attempting to acquire majority control, and because as a founding heir, I have the right to vote. I also have the right to run for CEO." Gasps filled the room. Gerald's face flushed red, the calm executive persona slipping from his shoulders like a crumpled mask. He snapped, "This is ridiculous. He's a child." I stood taller. "A child you tried to erase." Silence swept the room. My mother's breath caught. It was the first sound she made since entering. Catherine raised a hand, silencing everyone. "The bylaws state that any shareholder with founding lineage can petition for candidacy. We cannot dismiss him." And just like that, I watched the power shift, slowly, sharply, irreversibly. The board moved into deliberation. They reviewed my father's legacy, the company's original mission, and the corruption Gerald had left in his wake. They questioned me about my understanding of operations, questions I answered confidently because of every late night Frank spent teaching me. They tested my resolve, my knowledge, my vision, and I met every question head on. Gerald grew more desperate with every passing minute. His voice rose. His arguments became wild, unfocused. He accused me of forging documents, manipulating the board, even trespassing. But the evidence was undeniable. My father's signature beside the partner seals was irrefutable. His lies were dissolving right in front of him. After nearly 2 hours, Catherine stood. "We will now vote." Every nerve in my body felt electrified. The board cast their votes slowly, each one a small eternity. I didn't breathe as one by one they chose. Not Gerald, not a puppet, not a stranger to the company's roots. They chose me. When Catherine announced the final count, the room blurred around the edges. My chest tightened with something between disbelief and triumph. I heard the words, clear as a bell. "Congratulations, Ethan, you are the new CEO." Gerald's expression shattered. My mother sank into her chair, her hands covering her mouth. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt my father. I stepped forward, steady, confident, and shook Catherine's hand. The first time in my life I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I belonged exactly where I was standing. But this was only the beginning, because taking the seat was one thing. Facing Gerald and my mother afterward would be another battle entirely. The boardroom emptied slowly after the vote, leaving behind the echo of everything that had just happened. People shook my hand with a mix of surprise and respect. Some offered cautious smiles, others quiet congratulations. But my eyes were fixed on the two people who remained seated at the far end of the table, Gerald and my mother. Gerald sat rigid, jaw clenched so tight the tendons in his neck bulged. His hands gripped the armrests like he needed something to hold on to before his world collapsed completely. My mother looked small, smaller than I had ever seen her. She stared at the table, her fingers trembling, and for a moment I saw the woman she used to be before she let someone else rewrite her life. When the last board member left, Gerald finally stood. His chair scraped across the floor sharply, the sound slicing through the silence. He stepped toward me with eyes full of something between rage and disbelief. "You think this is over?" he said quietly, a dangerous kind of quiet. "You think a few old papers make you a leader? You're nothing but a boy playing dress-up." I didn't move. "A boy you tried to erase." His nostrils flared. "I protected your mother. I gave her a life your father never could." "You manipulated her," I said, my voice steady. "You isolated her from everything and everyone, including me." "Because you were a threat," he snapped. The honesty slipped out before he could catch it. His face twisted as he realized what he'd admitted. My mother inhaled sharply. "Gerald." He turned on her, his voice sharp. "Don't look at me like that. You knew this was necessary. You knew Ethan was too young to handle any of this." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I knew what you told me. I didn't know the truth." I stepped closer, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. "Mom," I said softly, "you didn't just choose him. You chose someone who convinced you my father's legacy was worthless. Someone who taught you to doubt your own son." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I believed she didn't know, but I also knew she didn't ask. She didn't question him. She let someone else decide who her son was. Gerald straightened, trying desperately to gather whatever dignity he had left. "I can still fight this," he said. "You don't understand the kind of people who back me." I met his gaze without blinking. "They're not your people anymore. The board knows who you are now, and they're done with you." The door opened, and security entered quietly at Catherine's request. 2 officers approached Gerald, not to arrest him just yet, but to escort him out until legal matters were sorted. He jerked his arm away, muttering curses under his breath, but he had no power left. He couldn't stop them. He couldn't stop me. As they guided him toward the exit, he turned one last time. "This company will eat you alive." I let a faint smile touch my lips. "Good, I'm hungry." The door closed behind him, and for the first time in years, the air felt breathable again. My mother stood slowly, her eyes red, her voice trembling. "Ethan, I don't know how to fix this." I exhaled, not angry, not triumphant, just tired. "I didn't ask you to fix it. I just needed you to see it." She took a step closer. "I'm sorry for everything." A part of me wanted to hug her. Another part of me wanted to turn away. But I didn't do either. I just nodded. "I know. Silence settled between us, heavy, complicated, real. "You're a stronger man than your father ever was," she whispered. "He would be proud of you." That hit deeper than anything else she could have said. She left the room quietly and I didn't follow. Some distances can't be closed in a single conversation. When the door finally shut behind her, I turned toward the head of the table. The CEO seat, my father's seat, the seat I fought for, bled for, rebuilt myself for. I ran my hand across the polished wood and sank into the chair. Not as a boy longing to belong, not as someone trying to reclaim a lost past, but as the man who finally stepped into his own future. The city lights glowed through the massive windows. The company name gleamed on the wall behind me, and for the first time I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story. I felt like the author. If you are still here with me, thank you. Moments like this remind me how far someone can climb after being pushed down. And the next chapter, how I rebuilt the company from the inside out, became a journey of its own. I drove to the off-books warehouse just after midnight. The road was empty, the kind of empty that tells you you're going somewhere you're not supposed to be. When I pulled up, the building looked abandoned, but the lights inside told another story. I stepped through the side door quietly, but the echo of my footsteps sounded too loud in a place like that. The crates Harris mentioned were stacked like walls, each one sealed, unmarked, and heavy enough that the concrete floor bowed slightly under them. Then I heard voices, Gerald's, and another man's, calm, foreign, confident. I moved closer, hiding behind a pillar. What I heard made my blood run cold. Gerald wasn't just skimming money. He wasn't just manipulating my mother. He was using my father's company as a front to import high-value tech components, shipping them off record to a private buyer overseas. If the government ever discovered it, the whole company would collapse. Thousands would lose their jobs. My father's legacy would become a criminal headline. And Gerald said the words that changed everything. "Once we finalize the next shipment, the boy won't matter. He's already removed." The boy. Me. I stepped out before I could stop myself. "Funny thing, Gerald. I'm still here." He spun around, face pale, eyes wide. "You weren't supposed to—" "Yeah," I said. "That's a pattern with you." The other man reached inside his coat, but headlights flooded the room from behind us. Trucks, security, not Gerald's, mine. I had spent the entire afternoon quietly informing federal investigators. They'd been waiting for my signal. Agents rushed in, surrounding the crates, the buyers, and Gerald. He screamed as they cuffed him. "This is my company. You are nothing." I stepped close enough for him to hear me over the chaos. "You erased me so you could steal everything my father built, but you forgot something." I leaned down. "You taught me exactly where to look." They dragged him out, still shouting, still twisting, still refusing to believe he'd lost. But he had. All of it. The warehouse was seized. The crates were taken as evidence. His entire operation collapsed in one night. By sunrise, the news had spread through the company. For the first time in a long time, people walked into work without fear. The board issued a statement clearing the company of wrongdoing and naming me as the rightful CEO. My mother called later that day. She cried harder than I'd ever heard in my life. "I didn't know," she said. "He hid everything from me." I believed her. Maybe that was naive. Maybe it was strength. But I decided not to let Gerald poison anything else in my life. A few days later, Frank, the man who had quietly changed my life more than he ever realized, showed up to my office. "So," he said, "you ready?" "For what?" "To build the version of this company your father actually dreamed of." For the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. "We rebuilt the logistics division from the ground up. We promoted the people who'd been overlooked. We cleaned out the rot Gerald had left behind. And I made sure every department had a voice, something the old regime never allowed." Months passed. The company grew stronger than it ever had under Gerald. And one morning, as I walked the floor and listened to the hum of a healthy operation, I realized something. I had become exactly what he never wanted me to be. Not just his successor, not just the man who stopped him, but the man who proved him wrong. My father once said that legacy isn't money or property. Legacy is who carries your values forward. I used to think I didn't deserve it. Now I know I earned it. This is Mark Reynolds, the boy they erased, the man who returned, and the legacy that will outlive every lie Gerald ever told.